Today we'll be discussing the Gilded Age. Mark Twain wrote, "The golden gleam of the gilded surface hides the cheapness of the metal underneath." When we think of the Gilded Age, I want you to picture a golden apple. It is bright and shiny on the outside, but the inside is decayed and corrupt. As we study the Gilded Age, I want you to think about which aspects are the golden exterior and which are the decayed interior. Your text says, "The key to understanding the Gilded Age lies in business. For in the years between the end of the Civil War and the dawn of the 20th century, business transformed the United States in many meaningful ways." An important contribution of the Gilded Age was the concept of the corporation. Instead of only one or a few people assuming the risk to opening a business, states began to legally permit companies to sell shares of stocks to interested buyers, thus spreading out the risk while raising vast sums of money. This allowed for the growth of many businesses. During the Gilded Age, an unprecedented number of businesses were consolidated into fewer hands. These consolidations hindered competition as they squeezed out competing firms. What occurred was the formation of monopolies. Some combined by horizontal organization. This is a combination of companies in the same field. Examples, all the phone or electric companies. Some companies used vertical integration. This method is when a corporation controls many steps in the production of a single commodity. An example might be coffee growers owned by Nescafe, trucking company owned by Nescafe, and then the retailer Nescafe. When we study the Gilded Age, we must look at the important entrepreneurs of the era, men such as John D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, Andrew Carnegie, Cornelius Vanderbilt, to name a few. These men were corporate leaders, or captains of industry, who amassed great wealth. But by their critics, they were seen as robber barons, gaining wealth at the expense of others. John D. Rockefeller became one of the world's wealthiest men as the founder of the Standard Oil Company. He was born in New York City. He first invested in a fledgling oil refinery. He had an eye for efficiency. He eventually grew to own 90% of U.S. refineries and pipelines. He was a true entrepreneur, investing and risking everything he had. Critics accused Rockefeller of predatory practices that worked to eliminate competition. The growth of monopolies worried many, especially in the area of banking. Banks gained great influence through the formation of money trusts that used their wealth to control businesses. J.P. Morgan was able to dominate the railroads in this way. He also later joined with Andrew Carnegie to dominate the steel industry. Andrew Carnegie was a true rags to riches story. He immigrated to the U.S. from Scotland and worked his way into the position that he could invest in his first steel mill. Carnegie met with Sir Henry Bessemer, who had created a more efficient way of making steel, known as the Bessemer process. Before the process, 50 tons of steel could be produced in 24 hours. After the process, it only took 15 minutes. Carnegie, through his promotion of the Bessemer converter, became one of the richest men in the world. However, in 1901, he changed his life's direction and sold out his stock in his company. He began to give away money. In the end, he would donate some $350 million to better society. Carnegie wrote an essay titled "The Gospel of Wealth." He wrote, "The problem of our age is the proper administration of wealth. In bestowing charity, the main consideration should be to help those who help themselves, to provide the means by which they may improve to do so, to give those who desire to rise the aids by which they may rise. Neither individual nor race is improved by charity. Those worthy of assistance seldom require assistance." So while he believed that the man who dies rich dies disgraced, he did not believe that money should just be given away. His philanthropy was concentrated on institutions that helped people better themselves, such as universities, hospitals, music halls, and libraries. In fact, the downtown Abilene Public Library was funded through Carnegie's philanthropy. Men like Carnegie, Rockefeller, and J.P. Morgan were champions of the American dream, even if they used ruthless tactics to gain their wealth. As American business grew into corporations, capitalism moved freely due to the government's laissez-faire attitude towards the economy. The idea that in a competitive business environment, there would be winners and losers began to resemble Charles Darwin's idea of survival of the fittest. This term comes from an interpretation of his work, not Darwin himself. A school of thought developed known as social Darwinism. The idea was that successful entrepreneurs were simply more fit, and that competition weeded out the less fit. Those with racist views use this school of thought to back up their beliefs. This clearly shows the interior of the Gilded Age. Rotten. During the Gilded Age, the draw of a better way of life encouraged a massive influx of immigrants. Rapid industrialization between 1865 and 1900 is part of the reason for this. We saw population growth from 2 million to 76 million in 50 years. You can see by this chart, we had immense growth of cities from 1860 to 1900. New York City by 2 million, Chicago by 1,700,000. Exponential growth. Most of these new immigrants came from Southern and Eastern Europe and did not speak English or share the predominantly Protestant religious beliefs. Nativism or nativist ideas began to permeate society, and immigrants were encouraged to assimilate. Working conditions during the Gilded Age were dangerous. There was no national minimum wage. 6 10-hour days was the norm, with many people being required to work 12 hours. There were no safety requirements, and often laborers were injured. Women and children were paid especially poorly. These conditions led laborers to fight back through the establishment of unions. The first major union was the Knights of Labor. This union attempted to unite skilled and unskilled. However, infighting caused the union to disband. The labor movement continued with the formation of the American Federation of Labor. This organization focused on skilled workers. Samuel Gompers led the union, which made an 8-hour workday their main priority. The powerful corporations had the support of the state and federal government. Corporations used their vast resources to break up strikes, and well-publicized violence turned American public opinion against the agitating workers. Several instances of strikes turning violent caused public outrage. In Chicago, 7 policemen were killed when someone threw a bomb during a protest. The Haymarket bombing caused many to see unionists and strikers as radicals or anarchists. Striking and protests continued, and in 1892 a standoff occurred at Andrew Carnegie's Homestead Steel Plant. In order to break up the strike, 8,000 militia troops were called in. Strikes continued, but major change was far off. On March 25, 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Company caught fire, killing 146 young women, many teenagers, who had recently protested their working conditions. The fire ultimately led to changes in safety regulation and more diligent efforts to enforce them. After you finish this video, please go ahead and watch the part 1 and part 2 of the Spanish-American War. It is going to talk about the Progressive Era in the beginning of that video because it was made for a previous class. Just disregard that. Know that the Spanish-American War starts in 1898, which is during the Gilded Age, but sometimes it crosses over and is taught with the Progressive Era.